Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to some. Welcome to our Fireside chat with the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. At MIT Sloan, we seek to create a community that encompasses all dimensions of diversity and fosters excellence within MIT Sloan. This includes diversity of identity, thought, role, and perspective. Every member of our community, student, faculty, and staff, adds a valuable contribution. We learn as individuals and benefit as a community when we seek out and thoughtfully consider divergent ideas and perspectives. And with regard to the student community, diversity begins right here with our desire to attract an incredibly diverse set of applicants to all of our programs. My name is Donna Levinson, and I have the utmost privilege of being the Assistant Dean of Admissions at MIT Sloan. I am so excited to be joined this evening by both Ray Reagans and Brian Thomas. Ray is our Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Brian has recently joined us as Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Over the course of the next hour and a half, yes, hour and a half, which is somewhat unusual for a session like this, but we felt it was important. We felt there was a lot to discuss, and therefore we wanted to allocate enough time to be able to do so. Over the course of the next hour and a half, Ray and Brian are going to share with you some of their thoughts and insights in terms of our community and the state of our community, but also take questions from you. If you recall, when you registered for this event, we asked you if you had any questions, and quite frankly, we got 3 pages worth, which is amazing. We're going to start with responding to some of those, but then as things come up, we anticipate that you all will be wanting to ask additional questions. So we'll split our time, taking some of the pre-submitted questions and then some of your questions live as we go through this evening. And with that, I would love to have Ray actually introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ray Reagans. I'm a faculty member in the Work and Organization Studies group. I've been on the faculty at MIT for 13 years, but I actually live in Pittsburgh. I commute from Pittsburgh to Cambridge every week. And I'm sorry to say, I'm a Steelers fan. That may not be good news for all of you. Should we let Brian introduce himself, or should I give a little information first?
Let's have just a quick introduction and then we'll go to information.
Yes.
Yeah, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Thomas Jr., the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at MIT Sloan. Very excited to be here. I started August 16th, 3.5 months, a little over 3.5 months since I started. I have not permanently moved to Boston, Cambridge yet. I will be in March/end of April. I still have dual citizenship here between here and California. So if you see light outside, trust me, it's not global warming to that extent. I'm in a different time zone. Just very happy to be with you all today and looking forward to having a discussion with you.
Great. So we thought what might be helpful for all of you is for Ray to share a little bit of the DEI historical context for MIT Sloan.
Thank you, Donna. So I figured I'd be brief here. And I think it's safe to say that our DEI efforts have been spearheaded by our students. And the wonderful example is in 2019, the co-Senate presidents wrote our dean, Dean Dave, and expressed a desire for the school to do more in the DEI space. Dave responded with a task force that included alums, students, staff, and faculty. And then they produced a task force report. And out of that report led to the desire to create a DEI office. And it also led to my appointment and also the appointment of Fiona Murray as the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion. And this happened in March of 2020. And as you know, something else happened in 2020. George Floyd happened in 2020. And this was an important moment in our DEI journey because our BBSA students wanted to share with the rest of the community how the Black Lives Matter movement was affecting them. They were scheduled to have a town hall for 2 hours. In that town hall, over 600 people showed up. We ended the town hall after 3 hours, and I still think we were north of 600 people, and it could have went on for many more hours. I am glad to say, I like to say, that their town hall became fuel for our effort. And I'm mentioning that to emphasize the point that our relationships with our students are critical for our success. This isn't to suggest our relationships are always perfect, but they are essential to everything that we do. As Brian just noted, he joined us a little over 3 months ago now, Brian.
Yep, low over 3.
And in my opinion, Brian is the game changer. His presence is going to take our efforts to a new level. And so I'd like to hand it over to you, Brian.
Yep, appreciate that, Ray. And again, like I said, thank you all again for being here and present with us. As the Assistant Dean for D&I, being in this space and leadership with Ray, Fiona, Dean Dave, Donna, the whole nine, is that it's very important to see like the work that's being done here, because mainly before I came here to MIT, is that I was very intentional where I went next. You all can look at places I've been, but in terms of or worked at, but when I decided to come here, is to think about, I remember having a conversation with Ray early on and trying to figure out exactly what's the mindset around DE&I here at MIT, and specifically more at Sloan. And then I saw he told me about the lens that they use and thinking about how we actually impact the systems and not being reliant upon a person, but actually building a system across the way we do things around here. So within the spaces that I've been in, I've seen so many things be reliant on a person versus like the actual infrastructure to make things happen. And I saw how MIT was making those things occur, not just with my position, but then also within similar positions with myself, not just across MIT, but then also across Sloan in various offices. So within that, you actually get to see the ecosystem actually connect and talk with each other and actually see the change that can be made from that. And with the students that we work with, and part of the reason why I was even interested in this role as well, was then with the mission that we have, it's like principled, innovative leaders. And the key thing is principle. And the thing is like, what are the principles that we stand by and to make sure that we actually are combating in any space that we're in, which within inequities, inequality, is that how do the leaders that we have in this space, how are they trained in this space as they're going to be the corporate leaders who will change the world? And within that, I'd say that MIT Sloan talent are generational talents, and they're responsible for making generational change. And we have the ecosystem to make that generational change with this group and the work that we're being done. So this is very exciting within this space. I'm very excited for the future, being in which like within our office, our physical location, for those who have or may not have been on campus, we are excited to greet you all when you all decide to come to MIT. I speak it into existence. So that's the way I roll. So I said, you will be here at MIT. I speak it to existence. So I'm always trying to be on the positive look on that, but be really great to drop in all the things that we're able to do, all the things that we will do in terms of our outreach, our connections, also with our very passionate student base, our very passionate alumni base. When you're a Sloanie forever. So we're making sure that this isn't just here, you're here for a year or two. It's like, no, you always tap into the ecosystem. So we're very excited to see you all here, and I'll pass it back over to Donna.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. So I'm going to start with, as I said, some of the pre-submitted questions. In some cases, they'll be directed to one of you, and in other cases, I think either of you or both of you can answer. So the first one, Brian, though, is in fact for you. As you mentioned, you're not in the Boston area yet, and you are in the process of moving to the Boston area. I'm hoping that you're excited about that. Curious what perceptions you have of both the MIT community as well as the greater Boston community in terms of cultural diversity, and what your thoughts are of becoming, part of the greater Boston community.
Yes. So for context, I never thought I would see myself in Boston, to be transparent. I'm a Southern boy from New Orleans, Louisiana, for those who are in America, and I do not like cold. So if you think about those two things and me being here, you would think, what would make this person who is in California come all the way over into Massachusetts and then within Boston? And then so for me, thinking about the space and the way that MIT and just Boston, Cambridge is forming, is that I'm really excited about the way that we're able to make connections, seeing like how the city, the state, and also within all the space that we're in, we'll be able to work together. So one thing that I tell folks that I'm a big person in sports or anything, but I always used to say that talent that we have, like just locally or anywhere, should not want to leave the state that we're in. Like we should be able to recruit and retain a lot of talent, diverse talent, culture, and all these things. And if you think about education, you think about the access to schools, you think about all those things, there are very few states that compete with Massachusetts. There are very few states that have the access and actually have the cultural aspect within that as well, to the cultural diversity and the connections with that. So what we have done and that what we're thinking about is how can we make sure that the students who come into our experience in the Sloan community, not just our silo within Sloan, how they actually connected to the whole ecosystem of what is our Massachusetts educational opportunities in the place that we're in. So that way you don't feel like you're stuck within a certain bubble, because I've been at certain campuses where you feel like you're in a certain bubble within a certain city. And so for us is to really see how do we actually build those connections. So that's what I'm most excited about. Before I even came here, people were reaching out to me and saying like, oh, we're going to connect here with the ecosystem of not just MIT, but then also with Boston, Cambridge, with the companies, with a lot of local things that are going on. And Massachusetts is a very enriched state with that. That's very similar to California. And it's very exciting to see those things, especially with flying back and forth, because I get a different type of clarity from going back and forth and actually get a chance to think and not be in that space. So overall, the state, I feel, and the way that the opportunities that are there, that we can actually be the standard for which, not just in higher education, but then also just for other communities to follow as we move forward, not just with D&I, but also higher education and equity in general.
Okay, thank you. So MIT has students and faculty from around the world. How does the school look at diversity and inclusion from a global perspective?
This one
Either
for
one
me
of
or Ray
you.
or both? Okay.
Either one of you.
I'll take this one. I mean, so we start with the idea that they're not the same. People have very different lived experiences, and those lived experiences are important for how they see the world, how they see the value of interacting with each other, and therefore the value that they're going to get out of being at MIT Sloan. In fact, our model, our DEI model, starts with becoming more objective about your subjective experiences. Spend some time to learn who you are and how your experiences in the world shape how you see the world. And so that's one of our founding principles of our DEI framework. But we also try to live it. So for example, when we were redesigning our orientation for our MBA students, we understood that having discussions around racial dialogue was important. But when we look at orientation for our Sloan Fellows, who are a much more international group of students, DEI there took on a cross-cultural flavor. And so our orientation there focused much more on cross-cultural diversity. And for our MBA program, our MBA students also cross-cultural experiences, but often at a more senior level in firms. And so we drew on their experiences so they could benefit from those diverse experiences across different organizations and across different cultures. But our school also has programs for younger students. So our Masters of Finance students, we focused in on DEI in the finance industry. These are the changes that are happening, and here's how we would like to prepare you for that journey. And we did the same thing for our students in our MBN program. These are, again, much younger students interested in analytics. And so we talked about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the data science analytics space. The point that I'm trying to make is we know from research, it's a mistake to reduce all dimensions of diversity to the same thing. And we try to take the pulse of our different communities to get a sense for what's important to them. And we use that to shape the material that we then use to shape the programs that we deliver. So that's our approach.
I think I have a good follow-up here, though. So given that Sloan is filled with diverse perspectives from both students and faculty, how does the school support the role of public discourse in the academic experience?
Yeah, great question. So this is actually something that's being built out of our office right now. So one thing that actually came from like working with the Student Senate is actually seeing like, how do we create those opportunities to actually have the civil discourse and dialogue? Because we see that there's a lot of power within connecting across differences, because that's where a lot of innovation comes from. Is when we understand different viewpoints, we actually see how do we elevate those things together to actually create those things. So one of the things that we have within the office is that, you know, a lot of people, like at MIT Sloan, we have these things called labs, but within ours, we have these things called studios. And then within the studio, there's a platform that we're creating, name to be announced. But with this will give the opportunity for us to have these discourse and these dialogue across differences around various topics in a way that's very healthy and very productive, to be that it's not a you versus me conversation. It's for helping us understand the core of which these things come from. And so that way people don't feel like there's a fear of quote unquote cancellation, a fear of this, that, and the third in terms of how people feel about how they navigate, because part of inclusion is about people feeling like they have the right to have that freedom of expression in ways people talk about those things. But how do we actually do this thing in a productive manner? I feel like the way in a healthy, productive manner gets lost. And I think the way that we create that is when some of the things that we have through the studio, in which we've actually currently collaborating with a few of our faculty here in designing those things and launching that early of next year in collaboration with our Student Senate.
Could I follow up on that, Donna?
Of course.
I mean, because one thing that we try to, also teach our students is this whole idea of when you come to Sloan, in addition to having a sense for who you are, an important next step is to feel comfortable contributing your truth and your experiences. But you need to recognize that as you assume that role, people around you will also be assuming that role. And so you also have to have courage for conflict. And so this is a very important moment for MIT. We are literally having town halls on freedom of speech and open discussion, because in many ways, we've stopped talking to each other as a university, because talking about hard topics is often risky. But when we sense that in our community, we don't ignore it. We are creating a platform where we can discover how different members of our community feel and think, with the idea of using what we learn to shape a value statement that we're developing for MIT. And so that's a very timely question. It's a hard question, but we don't run from the hard questions. We're embracing that fact at MIT.
Great, thanks. I'm going to combine two questions here and I lost them. Hold on. Oh, so the question I think is pretty insightful. Students are around for fundamentally a short period of time, 1 year, maybe 2. How can they engage with you all, your offices, to really impact meaningful change and lasting change as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say with this is there are a lot of opportunities to be engaged with our office, and as well as be engaged with the Sloan community overall. So one of which is through our student clubs that we do have very active on campus. We are going to be forming monthly forums with them, connecting with them, seeing how there's a lot of collaboration and synergies within their aspects and things and initiatives that we're driving, and see how we can partner and collaborate with our students. Second thing is with our Student Senate. Our Student Senate is very active. A lot of things that we have that have been created, I would say, in higher education overall has been birthed from student desires and students outreach and students displaying the needs for certain things that they want in their aspects within their realms of higher education. So even though you're here for 1 or 2 years, that you still have the opportunities as an alum. Like, it doesn't end within those 1 or 2 years. We have a very, very active alumni group. You get connected with that team as soon as you, like, even while you're here, but even after you graduate, because we know, as we said before, you're not just at Sloan for 1 or 2 years, you're a Sloanee for life. And within this space, you are always being connected with our office, having access to us. In fact, our alumni are about to receive something from our office in a few weeks. So there's a lot of different opportunities that you'll have to engage, even though you may be here for 1 or 2 years. But the thing is that we have that sustained knowledge to make sure like anything that you will work on, you don't have to feel like it has to be repeated, because then the momentum is started. And then instead of having like a snowball effect, you have an avalanche effect on which the work that you're doing. So it's all very exciting. There'll be plenty of opportunities. And we don't want you to feel like, oh, you have to do everything within a year or 2. This is a lifelong journey in how we move forward. So I don't want to have a finite time on it, because our job is to make your lives easier in these aspects. So that way we serve as a legal steroid where the side effects are belonging, inclusion, equity, and overall a place that you feel that you're happy to call home.
So I'd like just to add a little, and it's related to the infrastructure point that Brian made earlier. One of the first things that we did was to create DEI subcommittees. We have a student matters subcommittee. We have a staff matters subcommittee, a faculty matters subcommittee, and alumni matters subcommittee. And it's through that alumni matters subcommittee that we create continuity. And so the bad news is it doesn't end after 2 years. It's a lifelong journey.
Great. Thanks, Ray. So in terms of curriculum, whether that be, in the classroom or even leadership related courses, how do students develop their skills towards becoming inclusive leaders during their time at MIT Sloan?
Can I take this one first, Brian?
Go ahead.
So I think because one of the things that really makes me feel proud is when I share with my colleagues from different schools what we've been able to do in our core classes and our core electives. And what we've been able to do is that every core class and every core elective has DEI content. And some of those classes, multiple content. So for example, our DMD class, you'll gain some insight into how do I know that my algorithm is biased? And then what do I do once I know my algorithm is biased? How can I debias my algorithm? These are exactly the kinds of questions we think our students need to be able to answer. And so we build DEI into all of the frameworks that they're learning in their core classes and in their core electives. And it doesn't end there. It continues the second half of the first year, where many of our electives also include DEI material. We launched a new, can I use some insider language? SIP. This is a short classes when our students think they're going to get a break and we give them more information. And it was a SIP on systemic inequality, helping our students understand how you can have racism, for example, without racist, because it's a byproduct of a system of activities and interactions that can produce racial inequality. And so we want our students to appreciate how it starts, but also where they can intervene and where their interventions are more likely to be effective. And so in answering that question is, where aren't they learning about DEI would be my response.
Okay, Brian, anything to add?
I think Ray summed that up perfectly.
I did too. I wish I was taking notes there, Ray. So I thought that was great. A slight shift here, which is, so the Sloan School is MIT School of Management. How do we address people's perception that MIT is exclusively for geeks, nerds, geniuses? Is there a push to rebrand?
Well, Ray, you go first. I have my perception on it too, but go ahead.
Yeah, we are all those things. And so are you. Because our whole value proposition is appreciating what each individual brings to the table. And once we have a sense for what each individual brings to the table, here's one of my favorite sayings, one of my favorite propositions. We are smart enough to know we're smarter together. That's the rebranding. There is no singular genius. I'm sorry, Brian, I forgot your saying about teams. Teamwork makes the dream work.
There we go.
Okay? Smart enough to know we're smarter together.
And I will piggyback off what Ray said when he said what MIT's like, quote unquote, that perception is. So one thing I talk about with students all the time is, you hear about a lot of perceptions of a school from folks who may not, like, stereotypically or may not have been in those environments, all these other things. And then reality, what comes out of it is that students self-select out of a place. And my whole thing is, you should never self-select out of anything, because you are then blocking your opportunity to achieve things. So with that, if you say, like they say, the reputation is this, that, and the third about what it is, for us is to be, do you feel like, even with that reputation, what do you see in here? Do you see a place for you? And like, is there a class or some of interest of you? Is there something, a faculty member who's interested in research that you're doing? Is there some outcome that you saw that came out of MIT? If you saw that, then you're part of what MIT is looking for, because the knowledge and the base is there. You found interest in it as well. So I would say, just if anything, from whatever reputation a school or institution does have, is that do not self-select out of a place. Because I think that's one of the biggest detrimental things I've seen, because we're looking for folks like you all. But the challenge is sometimes the application part is the hardest part for folks to move through. So I say push through that barrier.
So I'll do a double dip. I'm a sociologist. One of my colleagues, Dimitri Bertsimis, was putting together a SIP on the kind of DMD ideas I was discussing earlier. He says, Ray, you got to be a part of it. That's the point. We understand the value that we create together.
Okay. A little bit of a shift here. So tell me, how does Sloan support female MBA students, especially those considering careers in typically male-dominated industries?
I'll tell you, Donna, I feel like you're in a better position to answer that question than either one of us.
Really? Huh. So this is what I would say. Thank you, Ray. What I think that what I believe firmly that MIT Sloan does for anyone who has spends time there, whether it be a year or 2 years, is helps people fully understand your contribution. It helps to further solidify your confidence about who you are and what you're able to do, and as a result, what you bring to the table. And I think while that's true for both men and women, I think for a woman in particular, when you then go and work in an environment that perhaps is more male dominated, you never question why you're there. And you never question what the value is that you're going to be bringing to whatever that situation may be. It actually piggybacks a little bit on some of what you were saying before, Ray, which is around, we value everybody's individual. We value what every individual brings to the situation, and we recognize, and this really ties back to our mission statement of trying to tackle the world's big problems, that big problems need lots of thinkers from lots of different perspectives coming together to make a difference. And that includes men and women. And so I think that's a big factor there for women in particular.
Exactly. If you want to change the world, first you got to be in the world. And you have to appreciate that world from more than your perspective. I think we also support our female students with our student clubs. We have swim, Sloan Women in Management. But I don't want to reduce us to those kinds of activities. I think that, Brian's already said it. It's belonging. We support all our students by trying to create a context where they feel like they belong and can thrive.
So, I want to try to honor some of the questions that are being asked here. And so another one that's a slight variation on that as well is around the trans and gender fluid community, and how does Sloan support individuals who identify with either one of these?
Yes, so with identity, and then especially for the trans community or just around the LGBTQ community in general, is that we have understand with MIT and then also with MIT Sloan is that any place within, like, regardless of how you identify, is that we want to move, and we're continuing to move, that if we have to say that something is a safe space, is it safe overall? And then for us is to say, how do we continue to move forward with that? So within the spaces that we do have within MIT, because I know a lot of folks say that we do have like our centers, which we do have, which we have that's really focused on the identity-based group, specifically with the LGBTQ community, but then also saying like, what supports do we have with that, not just within our students, but then also within our staff and other stakeholders within MIT. So to make sure that those parts are with safety in terms of like how we move forward, how we're thinking about our space, how we think about the examples and cases that we are using to make sure it's not actually being, okay, well, there's multiple dimensions of how somebody has within their identities, is understanding that we do have the trainings and things that we have to understand to make sure that we have being inclusive toward all of our teaching and practices that we do have, specifically with our teaching and learning labs that we have within MIT, the things that, and we take teaching, the criteria for that very seriously. A lot of institutions may not say that they take the teaching and understanding how to embrace a cultural, especially around folks with different identities in the classroom. But I can tell you at Sloan, that is taken very, very seriously in the ways that we know how to address and knowing how to actually address that person. So that way that person can be their whole self in the classroom and actually be able to live their truth. Because in the world of management, as you move forward, if you feel like you can't do it within this space, we understand that it's going to be harder going forward. So we want to make it showing you what's actually possible. And I think we're able to do that and show that, not just with the resource and efforts that we have within MIT, but the way that we actually emphasize our teaching and learning structures and the way that we teach our faculty to actually be able to understand how to move across different identities, specifically with the LGBTQ and the trans community.
If you don't mind me adding, I think we're making progress on this issue for our students, but we're not perfect. And there's more progress to be made. For example, members of our staff population, the LGBTQ community in our staff population don't always feel that they can bring their whole selves to work. And that's a problem. But the only thing that gives me comfort is the fact that they feel comfortable telling us as opposed to not telling us. Because when they tell us, now it's something that we can do something, or we can try to do something about it. And so in that respect, although we're not perfect, we're trying to create the communication channels that allows us to get better on these important dimensions.
As a Sloan student, we understand that we're able to also engage in other parts of MIT and the Institute. How much of interaction is there with other diversity clubs and initiatives beyond just Sloan within the greater MIT?
So I'll speak for some, and I know Ray will dig into it more. So I know when I came into this role, I came in with a cohort. There's 6 of us. I call us the 6. There's assistant dean within each school within MIT. We work very collaboratively, and also with integration with the ICEO. ICEO is the Institute Community Equity Officer within MIT, in which all the plans that they have to actually be engaging. There's a lot of collaboration in terms of knowing what initiatives that we're going to be coming out. Ray's involved in quite a few of those, and he was involved in those before I got here. So I'm going to make sure I give him space to talk about those. But just knowing that within these roles that we have, is that with these roles, specifically with me, these are all inaugural roles. So within that, it's very cool to see in a lot of the ways that we're collaborating and making sure things are happening, and some of the initiatives that were taken forth before we all got here. So I'll let Ray talk about a few of those. I know he was very active in some of those before I got here.
Yeah, but I think they were asking about students. And so here's the challenge. I live in Pittsburgh. I commute. And so up until this year, I spent the vast majority of my time used to be in E50, E52, our old building, and now it's in E62. So much so, last year, no, it would have been 2 years ago, I lost the COVID years. One of my students saw me in a building and said, "Professor, are you lost?" I said, "Actually, I am lost. Could you help me find?" So that's true for me. But if all you do when you come here is focus on MIT Sloan, you've missed a big part of the value proposition. MIT in front of a Sloan is a big part of that proposition. And there are lots of opportunities for students to get involved in activities outside of Sloan. I wish I could take them off for you, but I can't. But I do know that they're the things that our students talk about to the other students.
So when I've asked people at MIT Sloan about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm often told that a lot of progress has been made to date. What does progress look like to you, and how do you measure it?
I'll take that one. That's a tough one.
You said earlier when we were prepping, you'd take the tough questions.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out how to
Yep.
step into this tough question. And because we have some guiding principles. So we don't have a strategy, but we do have a strategic orientation document that we've written that's on the webpage. And there are 4 principles. And the first one is systemic problems require systemic solutions. And so what I was describing to you, this new SIP that we're creating, those are systemic problems. Let's talk about the systemic solutions. The next one is, if you want to change someone's behavior, first change the context in which they're making a decision. The third one is, learn what to measure before establishing metrics of performance. I'll stop at the third one because that was the question. And so we've gotten to the point now where we have a good sense for what produces desirable outcomes at Sloan. We have a good sense for the processes that work. And so now it's a good time to establish metrics. Let me be more concrete. So for example, we wanted to increase the diversity of our staff population. And what organizations or firms normally do in that situation is they hire through social networks. But the problem is, if your worker population is not diverse, it would just become more homogeneous. And so what did we do? We thought in terms of a system. We said, wait a minute, can we partner with search firms and tell them, we don't want you to search for candidates for us. We want to use your network to identify people who might know people who would be interested in a job at Sloan. And that led to a number of diverse candidates who have joined us over the last year. And so we don't have the kind of metrics that I think other people will have. We look for processes that produce desirable outcomes, and we measure ourselves relative, are we following those processes? If we play the right way, we'll get the right outcomes.
I think I'm going to do one more question, and then Stephanie, if you want to get ready, we'll start taking some of the audience ones. But I like this question, which is, so what resources and what mechanisms have we put in place for students who may feel out of place during their time at Sloan?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about the out of place part. Can you elaborate on that, Donna? I want to make sure I answer the question correctly. Oh, you said that.
It's a question that came in. I'm assuming it's,
Mhm.
we have students who may feel out of place because they don't feel that they are from the same socioeconomic, having just attended the AMA earlier today
Got
from
it.
our fly group, that perhaps they feel that they aren't able to compete, whether it be in terms of, I don't know, being able to even go out to dinner with, with friends, or the clothes they wear to school, or they may feel uncomfortable participating in a conversation that's taking place.
Mhm.
That's my sense.
Got it. So I think about it as with that question, like the process of othering and how people are moving forward within their spaces. How do we make sure that we prevent that? So the key thing for us is to making sure is that the thing that we talked about a little bit, but I'll get more precise with it, is we don't want you just to be a product of MIT Sloan. It's the community that you're a part of overall. So you're going to leave 100 Main Street, like out on everywhere we have within MIT Sloan in the building. And not just within the people you're able to connect with within the Sloan community, but also with the MIT community, but also with the Boston Cambridge community. So within that space, we know that being a student is very difficult, can be isolating, can be very challenging. And that's just what the reality of like what growth is. That's what growth sometimes like what requires, is like you're challenging yourself, and then growth comes from that. So within that, one aspect is our office. If you feel that way in those points of othering and being able to be connected, our office is there to help be that springboard for you within those spaces. We have a lot of resources, not just within our office, but then also within the Office of Student Life. They're a very dynamic team. They have a lot of resources to actually connect with a lot of folks to make sure that you are getting that connection, that support that you do need. And then also within MIT overall, because one thing that Ray talked about is that, if you just stay within the Sloan bubble, you do a disservice for yourself. And so within it, we are able to connect throughout the whole ecosystem of MIT, but then also with the Boston Cambridge community overall, because we know that as much as we're around and being in our same space, sometimes we need to break away from that as well. And there are also very much a lot of opportunities to connect with that, and there are a lot of resources that the Institute can provide for it. And I'll pause there and see if Ray wants to chime in with that.
Yeah, I'm going to add three things. Two of them are on topic. And it's ask me anything and yarn. I'll let Donna describe those to you in a minute. But something popped up in the chat. I have to respond to it. And it was, what took MIT Sloan so long to start making progress on DEI? And here's my response. We've been doing this work for a long time, but we haven't been telling people. So if you're familiar with the research on stereotype threat, you understand that the beliefs that a person has about a situation can affect their likelihood of joining, but also how well they're performing. And so we've come to the realization that it's not enough to change MIT Sloan. We need visible and credible commitments to change. So now people understand that default beliefs are not operating here. It is different. And so, yes, our efforts are more visible now because we've come to appreciate that we need to do that. But we didn't just start this journey. In fact, when Dave asked Fiona and I if we would take on this assignment, we were like, this will be easy. And why is that? We both do research on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've got tons of colleagues who do research on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we said, let's just continue to apply what we know from our research. And so this is part of our DNA. But what we haven't been doing is doing a better job at marketing, of letting people know that we're committed to this. And so, yes, there's change. And also part of that change is making more visible the changes that we're making. I'm sorry, that popped up on my screen and sat there, and I felt the I felt the desire to respond. But could you tell the students about Ask Me Anything in Yarn?
Okay, so real quick, these are two student initiatives. Ask Me Anything is just that. It's a panel of, it's usually students, but it could actually be other people to the extent that they identify with whatever the topic is. There was one earlier today that was hosted by our Fly Club, first generation college grads and low income students. And it was a panel of 4 students and a facilitator who we spend an hour together. They share some of their story. There's some, predefined questions, not that different than this format. And then the floor is open to ask them anything. It's a really powerful way for people to get to better understand other people or aspects of other people that they've not been exposed to before. For me, one of the most impactful Ask Me Anythings I ever attended was, it was a few years ago, but we had a student who was born deaf and she had cochlear implants. And she talked about what it was like to be a highly functioning individual in this world, being deaf. And in this particular case, there was also somebody on the staff in another part of MIT who had a similar situation, and it was the two of them together who, again, provided some context and then opened up the floor for anything. It was very powerful. The yarn, which is something else that Ray mentioned, this is MBA specific. I know other programs have different events similar to it. I know Sloan Fellows have what they call Muddy Talks, but this is we're in an extremely safe space. I cannot emphasize that enough. Members of the community tell their stories, and they tell their whole stories, and they tell sometimes painful and intimate parts of their upbringings or experiences that they had. Again, the requirement is that this is an extremely safe space, and these can be very, very powerful talks and really a great way to truly get to meet, know, and even further respect your classmates.
And so I asked you to share that because the question was about, what if I don't feel like I belong? And the answer is, you will see a number of examples where people are sharing their experiences precisely because they're different. And you will see their colleagues showing an appreciation for those experiences. And I also asked you to describe it because Dean Dave played the guitar at Yarn. So our dean also was involved in a Yarn last year.
I think with that, I'm going to actually ask Stephanie Butler to come on board. She's one of my colleagues in admissions. She's been monitoring the questions, and I think is going to take it over for a little bit and ask some additional questions that you all have submitted over the past 45 minutes or so.
Thanks, Donna. I first want to acknowledge how many really good questions there are submitted right now. And so I've been sort of, pulling some together, but it's inevitable that we'll miss some. So my apologies, your questions are wonderful. I want to build on what you were just talking about and actually see if you can elaborate a little bit more on your perception of the culture at Sloan. And so, outside of specific events like the Yarn or AMAs, how would you describe the culture in the sense that people, are people able to show up as their full, true selves in a day-to-day perspective?
That's a question for me.
I can.
That is for anyone, but you can go for it.
Yeah, I can give my quick one, Ray, then pass it on to you so you can give the more elaborate version of it. I would say that we are almost there. We're not there yet. I think there's a lot of space where, the one thing I would say is that I know that we're never done while doing this, because people are going to continue to evolve. People are always going to be able to be more diverse in the way they think about, just not with the way they represent with their identities, but then also with sense making and viewpoints. And so for us we are not 100% there yet. I'm very excited about where we're going with a lot of different spaces, a lot of different initiatives and things that are going on within Sloan and MIT overall. But to answer your question bluntly, we're not there yet. People are moving toward it. And I think there's a desire, and I've seen the desire for folks to make sure if people feel like they can't voice their opinions within here, are we doing a service to them and the institution with them being here? So I'll pause there and pass it on over to Ray.
Yeah, because I'm wondering if we're short a few panel members, if we're short a few students, because many of these questions are about their experiences, and there's no one who's in a better position to answer those questions than the students. And so I'm going to encourage the members of this audience to reach out to our students and ask them this question directly.
So Stephanie, that's a perfect plug.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. We're on the same wavelength.
Go ahead.
So we have sort of organized some opportunities to connect with students. We're hosting virtual coffee chats with our affinity groups next week. So at the end of our session today, and you maybe have already seen the page and some emails, but we'll share a link where you can register for further conversation with our students from those affinity clubs. Great. I do want to ask another question. We've hinted and kind of touched on a little bit. FLY, which is the sort of shorthand for first generation college graduates and low income students or people with those backgrounds. Could someone or a couple of people talk a little bit about, kind of the immense financial considerations that go into, pursuing an MBA or any sort of graduate degree from an institution like MIT Sloan, and how we might be helping to support students who struggle in that way?
I'll try. And you're going to have to keep me honest, Donna, because I'm not quite sure everything I'm about to say is completely accurate. But here's what I know, is that when we started, with our MBA students, and we heard from them how they felt exactly this issue, the need for more financial support. And here I have in mind, in particular, our URM students. And so, well, we are eggheads. We did an analysis of our win rates across our fellowships. And it turns out that at lower levels of support, we were not winning students that we should have been winning. And so what did we do? We made our minimum fellowship the median of our peer institutions. And that required a $25 million commitment, fundraising commitment from our partner, Kathy Hawks, and the Office of External Relations. So we recognize that students have hardship. Now, this is the one I'm not really sure about, Donna, and you should keep me honest. It's my understanding that MIT Sloan underwrites the student loans. Is this true, or am I mistaken?
Yeah. So if you get your loan from the MIT, what is it called? Not the COOP, the co-op. Those are underwritten by MIT.
The credit union?
Oh, thank you. Credit union. Oh, I was having a mental block there. Thank you. Yes, MIT Credit Union is underwritten by MIT. Absolutely.
Right. So we support our students in financing their education. I found this surprising when I took on this assignment. I couldn't think of other schools that I knew that were doing something like this. And so we understand that this is a financial burden. It's not an equal burden for all populations, but we try to support students because we don't want the finances to be a reason that a student's not having this experience.
Thank you. There was a question about how various groups, affinity groups at MIT Sloan, maybe collaborate together and host, events collaboratively, or, whether that's someone identifying, in sort of the intersection of one of those groups, or an ally of one and a member of the other, or whatever that might be. How do our diversity groups work together
So I guess I'll start with this one.
I was
So I
about to
would
jump in, Brian.
no go. I'll set the screen.
I couldn't get to my Jeopardy button.
No, okay, I'll set the screen then. You can roll.
So I was just going to say that, and then it'll be quick. So last year, I can't keep track of these years. I'm getting too old, people. But I sat through a presentation by our students on student allies. And what these students were doing was providing training so that other members of the student population who wanted to support them could have more insight into who they were and how they could be supported. And so, women, fly, LGBTQ, Hispanic, Black, they all had these presentations. It was like 100 slides. And I was like, this is amazing. My point is, this happened through our student senate because we have a DEI committee on our student senate. And they said, we understand that being here, we need the support of others. But in order for people to support us, they need to know who we are and who better to tell our story. And so that's one way that our students support each other. I'm sorry, Brian.
I was going to say the way the students support each other and work together is for this office to be in existence with the work that's being done with that. So I don't think there's anything stronger I can say within our way our students collaborate than just with, not just with Ray and Fiona and then myself, but then the team that's continuing to be built and expanded throughout MIT Sloan.
What do you anticipate as, one of the biggest challenges in the near future for the work that you do?
Silence. See, we know that there are people who are uncomfortable with our effort, but who don't feel comfortable voicing their opposition. And I think that's one of my concerns, because I actually believe that when given an opportunity to discuss these issues, in fact, I know it from experience, that when given the opportunity to discuss our frameworks and our goals, many of the people who opposed us when they walked into the room leave the room saying, actually, I don't really disagree with you that much. But they need to provide us with that opportunity. And so my biggest concern is silence. When people who are not on the bus don't voice those concerns, and so we're not able to address them. That's my biggest concern.
And then the plus one that Ray, and then I will also silence and then also isolation. I think that's the other big one. I feel like now it's very easy to isolate yourself within your own realms, which kind of goes into the realm like what Ray talked about with silence. So to me, I think one of the most challenging things is the fact of that isolation and having that courage for conflict in a healthy manner. And I think that's the part where people feel like, all conflict is a bad thing, which is not true. And I think I feel like conflict is disagreement squared. It's because we don't know how to disagree. So within it, I would say that isolation piece is probably the thing I see as the most challenging one, especially as we think about the ongoing pandemic we're in. Like people are more isolated and then just trying to be back acclimated to the world and just being able to connect with folks on that level, I see as the biggest challenge.
Donna, this one's actually for you. Could you talk a little bit about how you approach and the as you're crafting a class, how do you sort of approach that from a diversity perspective?
So I think the most important thing to note is something that I actually said very early on. Diversity starts with our applicant pool. And so within our team, our marketing efforts, our recruiting efforts, evenings like tonight are really all meant for us to be able to attract as diverse an applicant pool as possible. And we're very fortunate that, in any given year, we actually tend to have more qualified individuals than we have seats. And so that affords us the opportunity to be able to ensure, and the example that I like to give is nobody, including the consultants, want an MBA class of 400 consultants. And when we think about diversity, it's on many dimensions. It actually includes professional diversity as well, and people's professional background and experience. And so I use this as an example. We would never, ever want a class of 400 consultants. That's just not what, that's not the way anybody would want this to be. And so we have the opportunity to identify all of the people for whom we think would be a great fit for our program. And then we look at, different populations of people to ensure that we have a rich mix of individuals in our classrooms, diversity of thought, diversity of background, gender diversity, geographic diversity, many, many different dimensions. I hope that helps.
Can I piggyback on that, only to go back to the previous question about my biggest concern, and it's building a class. This is a relationship-based school. It really is a community. And although we had students in person last year, the restrictions on gatherings, the restrictions on people in the building actually undermined our ability to build relationships with the current class. And I'm really just starting to appreciate that. And that's also one of my big concerns. The fact that we are relationship-based and we have a group of students who are here now that we haven't been able to build up in the way, in terms of relationships, not the knowledge, classes, same. But in terms of the informal network that we need to be a community, we're still building that in year 2. We would normally be realizing the benefits of those relationships in year 2. So that's also one of my concerns. Sorry for the tangent.
Okay, all tangents welcome. One thing I'll add kind of on the admissions piece is that this also addresses another question or two in the Q&A. We're also still learning and growing and open to new ways to connect with prospective students. And so, nothing is set in stone. We're always trying new things and open to new opportunities. The next question for the panel is kind of around careers. And so I know this would be a good one for student follow-up as well, but in your perspective and in your experience at MIT Sloan, how does the school support students as they recruit for careers, particularly when it's something like finance, was an example in the chat, that maybe there's less representation of Black people or of women or, whatever group they're identifying with. So they feel a little bit behind, at the jump. So how does Sloan support from a recruiting perspective?
Yeah, that's not my question. Brian, you've spent some time. I'm not putting you on the spot. I have an answer, but I'm thinking someone else has a better answer. Would anyone like to take this one first? Good,
You take it first. I'll pick it up.
I'll take it first. I'm not sure, but here's what I know what we're doing. We have an MIT grad who's also in finance, who joined us this year and is teaching a class on finance. He's chief investment officer for the MoMA. And we're actually planning a conference around exactly this issue. Because we understand that diversity, even if it's not racial or gender-based, is our competitive advantage. And we want to create a conference that showcases that and tries to attract more diverse people to our community because they can see the opportunities for going into finance. And so I can't talk about what we're currently doing. I can talk about what's on the agenda for next semester. This is something we're in the planning stage of right now. We also need someone from the CDL next time we do this. It just occurred to me.
Any other thoughts, or I can move on?
I was just +1 array with the career with the CDO. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And career development office specifically for CDO, because a lot of times people think chief diversity officer. Career development office for CDO.
No, Brian. You're breaking the rules. MIT is all acronyms, and we use them as if you're here already.
I
Donna?
would like to add, though, I think,
Oh, Donna, it looks like you're off mute, but we can't hear you.
really?
Oh,
Can
now
you
I
hear
can
me
hear
now?
you. Yep.
Oh, okay, good. No, I just wanted to add, and this is actually relevant for both the career development and office and our office, which I hope signals our commitment to, from our side, creating a diverse student body, and from the career development side, supporting one. We have both of our offices have recently posted job positions for associate directors for diversity, equity, and inclusion, who will work directly with senior management from our admissions office and from the career development office across the CDO and its organization, from our standpoint, to ensure that from a marketing standpoint, a recruiting standpoint, and an evaluation standpoint, we are doing everything we can to attract an incredibly diverse applicant pool and to admit and to matriculate a diverse student body across all programs.
Yeah. I want to +1 something Ray said a couple of responses ago about how we're a relationship driven school. And so I think a lot of your support and resources during the recruitment process will come through relationships and come through direct support, whether that's from the career development office, from others in professional clubs you belong to, classmates, alumni. So I think that's a very relevant point for the career question as well. Next question, can you talk a little bit about how the school helps students acclimate to this environment and to the culture? What does that orientation process look like, or kind of your initial, weeks and months at Sloan as a student?
I'm laughing because the image that's coming to mind is fire hose. We acclimate students to this environment by first, orientation is, I think, I enjoy orientation. Orientation has leadership development, it has teams, it has DEI, but then after orientation, school starts and people work together as teams, and there's lots of work to do, right? So much that you have to depend on your teammates. I think that's how we acclimate our students to MIT, is that we create a context where first they learn how to work with each other, and then next, they really have to work with each other to thrive. Smart enough to know we're smarter together. And I thought fire hose people, because that's one of the cultural sayings from MIT, is that learning at MIT is like drinking from a fire hose. It's all coming at you so fast.
But if I could add to that, slightly, I'm going to say just a slightly different perspective on that, which is right now, and I'm assuming the majority of people who are on, this Zoom right now, you're just starting to learn about the school and about whatever program you're interested in. And quite frankly, we're in sales mode. And so we're throwing everything at you. And at times it can be a bit overwhelming because you're hearing about all the things you could possibly do in the course of whether it be a year or 2 years. And that in itself can be really overwhelming. And what I want to reassure you about is that once you're admitted and you decide to join us, we will start all over again. We will reintroduce the different topics to you, whether it be for MBA students, the different tracks and certificates, or even, talk about clubs again. And we'll do it at the appropriate time. And you'll recognize that as much as it's a lot, and I'm not, I by no means mean to contradict Ray in any way, shape, or form. but it's something, it's a little bit more manageable than perhaps you're sensing right now when you're learning about all of it all at once.
Yes, you should contradict me because I like the thrill, the potential thrill of MIT. You can create a very manageable experience at MIT.
You can.
You can also create a very unmanageable experience at MIT. So thank you, Donna, for reining me back in to say there's more than one path at MIT.
Thank you. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are prevalent these days, or companies and institutions talking about it. What would you say, how can prospective students know that we're, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk?
So to kick off with this, I'll start with anything you want to learn. Like one thing Ray talked about is that we had to do better with communicating what we were doing about all of those things, right? So for us, I'm a big transparency person, and I'm very big on narrative and telling that story. So for us, you may say like, oh, well, MIT has these, they have these people and just one person, all these things. So I would say for us in Sloan, as Donna talked about before, not only do we have somebody within our admissions team, having somebody in our career development team, having someone that will be in our communications team, that'll be forthcoming, data analysts, our office will be a team of 4 or 5. There's a lot of big things that are being constructed within Sloan that actually goes into exactly how we're built and how we can function, the systems for which everything talks to each other and how everything connects and make things work, and telling the story behind it, right? I always say that it shouldn't take a tragedy for us to communicate. And for us is to make sure how we're being proactive in that nature. Higher education in general is a very reactive place. And so for us is to make sure that we are continuously proactive in that space. So that way you don't have to wait on the next news headline for MIT to make the next statement. And so for us, it's to continue to do that moving forward. And I think you'll see that. And I think we are also just with building our data systems and making sure exactly how we communicate that, not just to the public, but then also personally, or not just internally, but also to the public, and making those updates through our sites and all those things that will be happening very early in 2022, which I'm very excited about, and seeing everything that we're doing. That's one of the things that got me excited about this role and made me want to accept this role, because I've seen places and been in places where they've done a lot of talking. I've seen places that actually do work. And then one thing, if I know about MIT, is that there's something that they really committed to, and hacking it, they will. And I've seen that Sloan is committed to hacking this and really tackling inequity and inequality, and also within the work that we're doing now.
And I add that we're really we focused in on our student population initiatives tonight. We haven't talked about the initiatives for faculty. We haven't talked about the initiatives really for staff. And so I think that's the evidence for how committed we are. We're not just focused on one population. We're committed to the entire community. But there's another thing that we're committed to. And it's this: if all we do is make MIT Sloan better for the people who are here, then we have failed. So what we're also trying to do is to provide people who are not here with an opportunity to benefit from what we're creating. So for example, we're calling them distributed research associates. And that is where undergraduates who do not go to MIT can do research with our faculty members. We are trying to increase the reach of this community that we're creating. Brian says, we need to own Boston. We need to own Massachusetts. So what we're doing here can't just be to the benefit of the people who are here. It also has to be to the benefit of a much larger community. So that's That's how I know that we're serious.
Donna, I just wanted to pause. We only have about 10 minutes left. I didn't know if you had any questions sort of left that you
I
wanted.
actually do have a final question for Brian. What, maybe you do one more and then I'll do my final question for Brian and then we can wrap it up. How's that?
Yeah, sounds good. Now I'm on the spot.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I had a good rhythm going and I lost myself. My apologies. We've talked a lot about the MBA program. Can you touch on some of the other programs? Someone asked specifically about Sloan Fellows, but you also mentioned specialized masters earlier. How do those students sort of integrate into the community, and what is it like for people from diverse backgrounds within those, smaller programs?
Yeah, that's a tough question, right? You're talking to one who has I have a limited view. The smaller programs, so our Masters of Finance program draws on primarily students from outside the US. It's a very, very international class. Our MBA program also draws on, the MBA also draws on a very large international student population. That's also diversity in our minds, right? This goes back to one of the questions we heard initially. That how do you think about different dimensions of diversity, including international diversity? We create programs that attract students from all over the world, right? And part of our challenge there is integrating them into our culture and the culture at Sloan. I'm not sure that's the answer that the person had in mind, but that's how I see those programs. They have a different diversity challenge.
And I would also add though, Ray, that, going back to actually when Dean Schmidtlein, Dean Dave, who Ray referred to, came here, he was challenged with increasing the footprint of the MIT Sloan community. And at the time, we pretty much had the 2-year MBA program and Sloan Fellows, and a relatively easy way to perhaps do that would have been to increase the class size for our MBA program in particular. And he was dead set against it for several reasons. But one of the reasons was to create a portfolio of programs with individuals at different stages of their career experience. That in itself is another form of diversity. And while all of our programs will have a core set of classes, are these different students from the 2-year MBA, Sloan Fellows, and Masters of Business Analytics and MFin, they come together in electives. They work on project teams together on electives. And these are people with, at that point, anywhere from 0 to up to 20 years of work experience. And so they look at problems differently, which is part of the design. Okay, Brian, my last question for you. 1 year from now, how will you know you've made a difference in the MIT Sloan community? I have no doubt you will. It's not would you, it's how will you know?
Can I just say, Donna, I'm so glad you gave that question to Brian. Thank you so much.
You said in a year, how will I know? Realistically, I would say in a year, I will know when our alums and current students are more excited than we are about the things we're doing when they leave, and they are proactive in sharing what we're doing with other folks. That's how I know that we've been moving forward. When people are excited about something, they tell a whole lot of people. It's like a song you like. Hopefully we have a song that everybody wants to sing, learn the lyrics to, and everybody wants to come to the show.
Thank you. So I think with that, we're going to conclude our evening. I want to say something very personal, which is I failed to mention early on that I too am an alum. And, you know, throughout my years, there have been moments where I've been so proud to be a member of this community. And tonight just is one of those nights to be able to share a stage with Ray and Brian, and for them to be able, I mean, for the most part, they answered all of the questions, some of them very difficult, incredibly honestly, showing, I believe, our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the progress that we have made and will continue to make. I am so proud to be a member of this community, and I hope that came across pretty loudly and clearly to all of you who are thinking about possibly applying to any one of our programs. So I really want to thank both Ray and Brian, and of course, Stephanie, you and Catherine, who's also on our team behind the scenes, helping out. I greatly appreciate it. With that, in case you didn't know this, and hopefully this is not why you came here. First of all, as Stephanie mentioned, we're going to have a follow-up virtual coffee chats with a variety of our different affinity groups. You can actually go online and be able to register for these. These are meant to be small groups, and so I apologize if some of them fill up quickly. But please, you know, this is a great opportunity to hear from the students. In addition, anybody who's attended the session, you will also get an application fee waiver when you apply to any of our programs. It should happen automatically. If for some reason it doesn't, please do not worry. Simply send an email to our, you can see here, admissions@mitsloan.mit.edu, and we will fix it. And I apologize for any inconvenience that may have caused. And so with that, again, I want to thank each and every one of you for spending a good portion of your evening or afternoon with us, or even morning with us. And I want to thank our panelists, Ray and Brian, for providing really, really thoughtful and insightful responses to all of the questions. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, folks.